The other explosive director.
That's right.
The Canadian with the concussions.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry, Michael Bay. Oops. Hi, I'm Teresa. Welcome to Cocoon Cast, where we deep dive into movies and discuss all things cinema.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Today we'll be taking a break from our usual show on Saturdays and instead be discussing the cult classic Pee-wee's Big Adventure. We will also be discussing the quirky superhero movie Mystery Men.
As many people in our cinema community may know, comedic actor Paul Reubens passed away after a private battle with cancer on July 30th, 2023. We've decided to take this week to highlight a few of his movies. Let's get started.
Pee-wee Herman has eyes for only one thing, his bike, and he's not the only one. After the bike is stolen, Pee-wee must embark on a cross-country adventure to find it before it's lost to him forever while meeting all sorts of people in the process.
Rebecca, we both chose this movie for obvious reasons. Tell the cinema community a little bit about why you wanted to choose this movie.
I wanted to choose this movie because, spoiler alert, it's one of Teresa's favorite movies. So I'm totally pandering to my audience here.
The audience and the cinema community at large.
But I also find this movie is a hallmark of alternative comedy, especially here in America. Paul Reubens is an iconic figure, and this was a lot of people's first introduction to him, not just Pee-wee's Playhouse. I'm also a sucker for Tim Burton. This is Tim's first live action film that he's directed. He has many of his frequent collaborators, especially his early team, like, say, Danny Elfman. A lot of people know Danny Elfman. And a lot of his hallmarks are very clearly defined in this movie. It's also just a fun movie to pop on and enjoy, and even besides the nostalgia quotient.
Well, and obviously you're pandering to your cinema community. Right?
My personal cinema
Your
community.
personal cinema community. It's no surprise to Rebecca and our cinema community will, over time, hear how much I love this movie. And I know some people love Paul Reubens. Some people don't like Paul Reubens on a personal level. However, I would say, even if you're not the biggest fan of him, I would say give this movie a chance. It's hilarious.
It's very cheeky.
It's cheeky. It's hilarious. It's a clean movie.
Mostly clean.
Mostly clean. However, it's funny. The movie was written with Phil Hartman, one of our family favorites.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil Hartman's hilarious. This movie brings back such wonderful memories to me. I was 15 when I saw this. I remember seeing it in the summer. You know, great guy I was dating at the time, super fun guy. We laughed so hard. We saw this in the theater. We laughed so hard. We were crying. It was so funny. And now here I am, fast forward, right? In my 50s, still think it's a funny movie. Still, as you said, cheeky.
One of the things I love about this movie is it's a love letter to Hollywood, but it also mercilessly just lampoons Hollywood.
Oh, it does. And I like the phrase, it's a love letter, because it's not mean. It's not mean-spirited at all. But there's a lot of nods, a lot of, as you were saying, different movies were brought to mind after watching this, different scenes. You were paralleling a Marilyn Monroe movie to this, Shirley Temple movie. You're like, how can a guy in a tight little red suit, a little gray suit with a little red bow tie, how in the world does that even work? And yet it does.
I think the thing that really helps this movie is Pee-wee's not maliciously trying to ruin people's lives. He's just on this quest.
He's just doing it. He's not trying, but it's just so happened.
He's on this quest, and this quest kind of takes him through this journey where people, whether they like it or not, are forced to encounter the force of nature that is Pee-wee Herman.
Well, and that's a good point. This is definitely a road trip movie, meaning all the different people he meets, and everyone likes him.
I can think of 2 people who don't.
Oh.
But even then, these people are still
he wins them over.
Are affected and changed by Pee-wee.
Well, how do you not meet him and not be changed?
That's a really fair point, because Pee-wee provides such a contrast to everyone he meets. It's not like you meet one person who's like Pee-wee. The closest thing you can meet to Pee-wee is still somewhat different and is more grounded in reality than Pee-wee is.
I'm just laughing. I'm like, how many people in your life have you met like Pee-wee? They look like him, they dress like him. I think if you met him, your life would be different because you're like, I've never met anyone in my life like you. But I think that there's a part where there's a young quality to him. However, he's an adult. He has his own house. He maintains his own house. He makes his own breakfast, clearly. There's a whole machine for this. Takes care of his dog.
Dog looks pretty healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see what he's feeding him, a bowl like the size of your head, right? It's like, yeah, I think the dog's okay. But yeah, I would say the movie for what it is. Understanding it's quirky, it's silly, you'll find yourself laughing at parts, the lines were good, the acting. We say acting, right? Is this based on a true story? Is there... I remember when this movie first came out, and I can't remember when he stopped doing it. The movie came out in 85, but he was for multiple years doing interview on talk shows and things as Pee Wee Herman, as if he's the real deal. Not, oh, I'm Paul Reubens dressed up like this character. It's like, I am that person.
That was my understanding too. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't he also show up at the Oscars as Pee Wee Herman at one point?
I think he did, actually, which is so sad. I just remember all the lines in the movie and the Oscars. I'm like, blip. But I remember he went on like David Letterman and some of the other, Jay Leno, and he was Pee Wee. So to say, is this based on a true story? I laugh because back in the day you go, maybe it was, but truly no.
Well, it's kind of like the Muppets. The Muppets are the Muppets.
Oh no, you're telling me the Muppets aren't real?
No, but I mean, in the minds of a lot of people, the Muppets are their own people. You're not thinking of a little hand going. It's just the Muppets are the Muppets, and it's just funny to see people treat the Muppets like the Muppets. They're not trying to break the illusion.
No, and I think that there's something pretty sweet about that in a way, because you like the characters, you like the people, and even though in the back of your logic brain, right, you go, oh, that's not real, this is just somebody dressing up, there's a certain part, like you said, it doesn't break the illusion.
But it definitely provides an interesting contrast to Reubens' other roles.
Correct, which we'll be talking about in Mystery Men. He's not a one-trick pony, which is nice.
Well, and then the other film that I advocated for this retro rewind and was shot down by our Cocoon cast team was Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, right.
And he kind of plays like a really comedic interpretation of a vampire. But the most that people see him is Pee-wee.
Well,
so when you see anything else, it just rips that.
Well, and he is more versatile. I remember he played, I believe it was in the early 90s, he played on Murphy Brown with Candace Bergman. He was like her assistant. She like went through like all these assistants, and he was one of them. And he was nominated. I can't remember if he actually won, but he was nominated for an Emmy.
Wow.
For that role. And I'm thinking, that's hilarious. Because, it's just a small role. It's inconsequential. You go, oh yeah, she's had all these assistants. But he made an impression. And like we talked about, we're going to contrast Pee-wee's Big Adventure to Mystery Men, which there's a whole story about that one.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. But yeah, no. And I think that's the part where we're talking about, is it still funny? And we talked about kind of having cult status. So this movie had a relatively small budget initially. I think it was, $7 million? And it went to, oh my goodness, it made a ton of money, which is ironic in of itself.
It's safe to say that if this movie had not succeeded as well as it had, and especially Beetlejuice, Tim Burton would not be directing today. At least to the level that he has been granted.
Well, and that's what we're saying, right? So $7 million movie made almost $41 million. Launched Tim Burton. Danny Elfman did the music, and prior to that he was Oingo Boingo only.
Oingo Boingo exclusive.
Yeah, I was going to say that first. Oingo Boingo early. Yeah, but that brought him on the scene. And then he did Beetlejuice also for Tim Burton in 88.
Believe so.
Correct. Yeah. So that partnership between, and even I remember when Paul Reubens had passed away, Danny Elfman had put this really nice post. He was doing a concert, and he really acknowledged the difference that his career had taken because of working with Paul Reubens in this movie.
I think it's kind of cool because Paul Reubens really wanted to see the best in people, And I think of this movie as him getting all of his buddies together and going, what can we do on a weekend and just have some fun?
Well, and I love the fact we were talking about Phil Hartman and have a real soft spot for Phil Hartman. Love Phil Hartman. And I know you know him more from news radio, but he was Saturday Night Live, and he's done a ton. And he is wicked funny. And and he did a few cameos in the movie as well. He was the voice of the rodeo. If you've seen the movie, you see the rodeo scene, you're like, that's Phil Hartman at the end. He's one of the photographers. But it wasn't, I have to be front center.
And Phil is an amazing, I don't know what the actual clinical term is, impressionist?
Impressionist,
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I don't know that that's a clinical term. I don't think.
Well, I mean,
I don't think the psychology community goes, that's something. I think that's more of a
clinical as in like clinical studies or like
clinical
comedic studies, I guess.
Comedic studies.
I just got off work. I'm tired.
Now he's a rat. And
I think it's really cool to see all these people really try to show that this is Paul's story.
Or Pee-wee, as the case may be. Well,
but Paul also takes in stuff from his personal life. You and I were talking about one specific costume sequence where he literally takes someone from his own life and goes, how can I include this in here?
No, and it's hilarious because if you're that person, it's his relative, it's his sister, right? So if you're Paul's sister, can you imagine if my brothers did that? I'd be like, hey, that's me. What are you doing? Well, and there's so much of him in this movie. We talked about the set design.
Yes.
Much of the props, if you will, the furniture, everything was Paul Reubens' collection. So there's a big part. I don't know if the Mr. T cereal was his, but the other pieces were his.
See, now I kind of want to see, like, it's too late, unfortunately. I wish they did like an architectural digest feature on his house.
Goodness,
like,
architectural digest.
How close is the Pee-wee house to Paul Reubens' actual house?
Well, and I've seen pictures of the house since then, and in the movie it was like a bright red and it was like painted white, and they were saying his neighbor, his nemesis, Francis, house was listed, I think they said like 17 million, and they had to relist it at like 12 million. I'm like, 12 million? That's a little crazy. I'm not sure how much the Pee-wee house sold for, but apparently you can drive by it or something, but it's like this, innocent little white house. It doesn't have all the, crazy Pee-wee effects to it.
Fun fact, Amy Doan, the owner of Sugar Pill, she was talking about how she used to jog by the Pee-wee house.
Oh my goodness.
Every morning because she used to live over there.
So this is inspired. Oh, Sugar Pill, tell our cinema community about Sugar Pill.
Sugar Pill is probably one of my favorite cosmetics company. Shameless plug, I love them.
Well, and I laugh because bright, and she jogs by the Pee-wee house. So maybe there's some inspiration that you just don't even know about. Well, and let's talk about, we talked a little bit about the acting, clearly. I think it was a well-cast movie.
Nobody was overbearing. That's the big concern I have with films like this is you have a lead character who's clearly defined. Mm-hmm. Is anybody going to upstage them? And instead, I find myself appreciating how the cast is complementing each other.
Well, and I was reading, so Dottie, who has a crush on Pee-wee, he has not much interest in her, which is funny because he has an awareness that she likes him, but he just kind of pushes her off, but keeps her close. Kind of, I don't know if that's a clinical issue, but it was kind of interesting. But I was reading the part of Dottie, Phoebe Cates. They had considered Laura Dern. They had considered just multiple women that we know as actresses today.
I'm just picturing Laura Dern as Dottie. It's very
maybe, but it's just, it goes back to, in previous episodes we talked about, I believe the cast is cast the way it is. I know Tim Burton does a cameo.
Yes.
In a dark alley,
it's a
which
very
is
blink and miss it.
It's a blink and you miss it. But just a lot of characters even today. Large Marge. Apparently she does not blink. If you look closely, she doesn't. I say I want to look at you and not blink, but she doesn't blink.
Oh, you blinked.
Yeah, right. Madame Ruby. Right. I mean, there's just iconic characters that I laugh that all these years later, I still remember the characters and I could still tell you what they say.
Well, And some of these characters are 5 lines or less. But they
Oh.
still make an impression in this movie.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
I can't imagine. So I would say that that's a big part. The music, we talk about Danny Elfman. I remember when you were younger, we would play the soundtrack before you even were able to see the movie.
That's correct. I remember going to school, and this is one of the CDs we would throw on.
That's right. And the movie was enhanced so considerably with this music.
There's one sequence in the beginning where the music adds itself to kind of the bombastic nature of the film. And I feel like without that, you would lose some of the passion that kind of powers this film.
Well, it is energetic. Danny Elfman's music has always been very energetic. And I remember years ago we had talked about his music, and he tends to compose starting backwards, moving forward versus going forward to moving backwards. And how many xylophones and bells, and it's just, his music is iconic, right? Edward Scissorhands, he's, Batman movies, he's done a ton.
And they're not all Tim Burton movies.
No, that's a good point, actually.
And he's worked really closely with Sam Raimi for the original Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire.
Oh, and the favorite one I remember was the Men in Black.
I still like the Men in Black
The
soundtrack.
Men in
Barry
Black.
Sonnenfeld is awesome.
Correct, and that's the point, though. The music makes the movie, and like you said, there's this partnership between all of them. I know we talked a little bit about the screenplays or anything else. Any other thoughts you had around that, or?
The screenplay is fun because there are moments such as when Pee-wee is trying to illustrate the importance of his bike being lost and anything he can do to find it. There's a joke that Paul revealed when we went to your birthday celebration and we
we'll
saw
talk
it.
about this.
The punchline was kind of orphaned from a previous gag. They left it in. It's still funny, even outside of the context.
Well, just to fill our cinema community in, they missed my 50th birthday. So let's fill the cinema community in. On my 50th birthday, it was, what do you want to do? Do you want a party? Do you want a nice meal? What do you want to go somewhere? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to see Pee Wee Herman. Or Paul Reubens was in our nearby city, literally on my birthday. How much better could it be? I know he planned it just for me. And he answered questions for an hour and a half. And then they showed Pee-wee's Big Adventure on the big screen. And we're talking big screen. I couldn't even tell you how many people were in that theater, like 1,000 people.
The entire theater was packed. So I think about...
it was a sold out experience.
I would say about 3,000 people knowing that.
3,000 people. Okay. Obviously, I'm looking at the screen, not everybody around me. But it was the funniest thing that all these years, I laugh at this movie. I know you appreciate this movie. Your dad, I think, has warmed up to the movie over the years and now laughs at the movie as well. But to have 3,000 people saying the lines together, it was like a little...
It was like a little murmur. It was interesting.
Oh, it was hilarious.
It was like I was watching it at home with 3,000 people, number one. Number two, it felt like the most wholesome screening of Rocky Horror Picture Show that I'm ever going to be part of.
Oh, yeah. I remember that
Because
back in the day.
it just felt so warm. It felt inviting. It just created this. There were a few people that mentioned that they had never seen the movie before in the audience.
That's true. That is true. But for the most part, I would say people had seen it. And in hearing a sea of 3,000 people laughing at the same part.
And this is a diverse
goodness.
audience of people. This is
very
not
much.
all one kind of people. This is a diverse audience of people enjoying this film. And I think that was really powerful to me.
Well, and I appreciate that too, because I understand, right? I have nostalgia and that sort of thing. And not every movie I saw when I was a teenager, I still love and find fun.
I really think that speaks to the timelessness of this movie.
Well, and when we say cult classic, right, that sounds a little, what does that even mean? But to say it's timeless, you and I were having this conversation. It felt like the movie could happen at any time. In Southern California, at any time, this movie could happen. You walk down the street and there's a guy dressed like, Pee-wee riding a bike around. Maybe Venice Beach, but the point is, and it goes to the costuming. The costuming, I know you and I had talked about, was very simple but very iconic.
I think that speaks to the level of the costume design too, is you can immediately tell a lot about a character just by looking at them.
Absolutely right.
And there was some cohesion too. If the costumes felt kind of goofy, they went with the environment, but it just felt exaggerated, but in a grounded kind of way.
No, and that makes sense to me. And I think that there's a part where it can be comedic and goofy, and then you lose sight of what's actually trying to be communicated. And I had a feeling that wasn't the experience. It was like, oh, wait a minute, it's just enough to make the point.
It's a very hyper real world in some ways.
Well, and the coloring is where are my sunglasses when I need them?
Even arguably the second darkest film scene, the one that's in the Satan's Helpers motorcycle club, there's still a...
If you have not seen this movie, people are like, I'm sorry, what?
There we go. We grabbed our audience. Even that scene still has punches of color that you can see throughout the scene. It's not very dry. You have these wonderfully rich tones throughout the movie.
I'm still laughing because I'm thinking of our cinema community. They're still stuck on Bikers Club. What? What is he doing in a Bikers Club? Well, you must see the movie and see. And so Tim Burton directed this movie. One of your favorites.
One of my favorites.
One of your favorites. And I know we had talked about some of the choices he had made. There was like a nod to Batman before he even did Batman, but like the original Batman. And some of the other, in Beetlejuice, right? One of your favorites. How do you feel it measured up to the other Tim Burton movies you like?
I like Tim Burton movies that are a little bit more grounded in reality, but also have that.
This feels like reality. What are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about like things like Big Fish.
Okay. Yeah.
This feels like a comedic take that you would find in a world like Big Fish.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's a good comparison. Do we have any questions from the box?
This movie looks pretty goofy. Is it only for kids? Or do you think other people really would enjoy it? So talk about the audience.
I think the people that are going to enjoy this are people who don't take themselves too seriously and kind of allow themselves to be open to whatever this movie is going to throw at them.
Well, and I agree. I know you and I had talked about Pee-wee's Playhouse, and your comment was, in your mind, Pee-wee's Playhouse came first, and then this movie came second. And it was actually the reverse. And even Pee-wee's Playhouse, I had read an article with Paul Reubens at one point, and he had actually made the comment that this is a show for everyone. It's not watered down. It's not like for adults and kind of like the wink and nod, like, oh, it's, this is something. He wanted it to be clean and fun.
I find it interesting, especially considering that Pee-wee's Playhouse is currently on Max as of the time of this taping of the show. And I watched it, and I could watch it three ways. I could watch it really straight-laced, like it's a Mr. Rogers send-up. I could watch it as a kid, enjoying it, or I could watch it as an adult, just going, there's layers to this joke, and it's funnier.
But it didn't feel disrespectful, and I feel the same thing with the Pee-wee movie. Is it goofy? Indeed. I mean,
it's totally goofy.
It's totally goofy. And like we had said earlier, some people in our cinema community may not like Paul Reubens. His personal life definitely was entangled at different points in his career. Yeah, no. And I would respect that if people are like, oh, I don't know about that one. But as an adult, it's still funny. It's clean and it's funny. Do we have any questions from the box?
Why do you think this movie is a classic and approaches the whole cult status?
I think this movie is a classic because it takes so many different things that are universal to different cultures, but we all find funny. I think the problem that it kind of encroaches on and that veers it into cult status is the way that it mixes these things. It takes things that are considered also very specific in terms of their audience likability, and it mixes them with just a little bit more heft than say, oh, we'll do things everybody likes this much, things not everybody else likes this much, because that's where a film like this usually goes. Instead, it's more of a 60-40 balance. Things not everybody likes, things everybody likes.
Well, and I know we had talked about one of the interesting pieces of trivia that I found interesting. We were laughing about it. Is this movie the authors of the screenplay, right? They had literally picked up a book of how to write a screenplay, read through the book, and they just followed it step by step by step. And this movie, as a classic, literally is taught in multiple film schools as the standard for a standard screenplay. 90 minutes, 90 pages. Literally, it reads like the book. So when we say is it a classic, we're like, well, it is. It follows the standard, which is, pretty funny. But I do think that there's a part where, obviously, when I first saw it, I never had thought, oh, it's going to be cult classic. It just was one of those things where it became that.
And I want our cinema community to comment below. Do you think that this movie has the potential to go mainstream? Or is it more of a cult classic in your mind as well?
Rebecca, it is that time of the show where the moths are flying and they don't know where to land when they look at you. Where should the moths land?
The moths should land about 3 moths today.
About 3 moths. All right. Number one reason for 3 moths?
It's a solid movie. To me, it feels a little by the book, but there's...
Literally.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
There's enough engaging elements that keep me guessing.
Although you've seen it many, 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 many times.
That's very true, but I keep finding things to like about it.
Oh, that's a good thing. And as you've grown older,
there's more to appreciate about it.
Wow, I'd be curious to find out when you're my age, if you're like, wow, I think I would see that again.
I know I'm going to see it again. The question is when and with whom. And that's also a good sign of a good movie too, is I want to share this with people.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Well, I'm laughing because I see the look in your face. Oh, where will her moths land today?
I have 2 predictions, so let's see how you do it.
Wow. All right. So I would say 4.5.
Oh, okay. So you landed on my first one.
Okay. So 4 and a wing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great movie. It makes me laugh still. The fact that I would literally spend my 50th birthday with you and your dad and skip everything else to see this movie with 3,000 strangers, or I don't know, 2,097.
2,997.
Yeah, so 997 strangers. And laugh and still enjoy it. I think that really says something. And then wanting to share it with your dad, wanting to share it with you, wanting to share it with other people, share it with our cinema community. I think that says something.
Well, and it's not in a share it in a, oh my gosh, this movie is so bad, you have to watch this with me. It's like, this movie is so fun. You want to sit down and watch this with me.
Exactly. To share it in a really good and positive. Hey, Rebecca, it is that time of the show to talk about who we are not sponsored by.
Man, special show just for Paul Reubens, and we can't get a sponsor.
Not just any sponsor. Chuck's Bike-O-Rama is not choosing to sponsor our show today.
Now that's a travesty.
That is a travesty. Do you know about Chuck's Bike-O-Rama? Have you heard about Chuck's Bike-O-Rama?
I believe I have, but fill me in anyway.
Let's talk about this. So, Chuck's Bike-O-Rama. Who do you think his number one customer is?
Obviously, Pee-wee.
Pee-wee! Pee-wee is his biggest customer. And Pee-wee comes in there and gets bike checked. Goes in to see Dottie. Dottie is his employee. She's his little mechanic. Goes in there for horns, tire rims. You see that bike chain that he had? I bet you he bought that at Chuck's.
Oh, that was fancy. That horn, too.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like a semi.
Oh, that was great.
I was going to say, wouldn't you buy from Chuck?
I'd totally buy from Chuck.
I would buy, but Chuck doesn't want to sponsor us. Even though we're talking about Pee-wee, we're talking about his big movie. Chuck said no.
Oh, man.
I know. And here's the thing. Lots of people ride bikes. Free advertising, Chuck. Free advertising.
Especially where we live.
I was going to say, I ride bikes. Come on, Chuck.
You got how many bikes? Like 3 bikes now?
Well, you know.
You got a bit of
But
bike.
Chuck doesn't care. See, that's the problem. Dottie works for him. We like Dottie. She takes good care of Pee-wee. You would think Chuck would say, oh my gosh, I need to sponsor Cocooncast. They're talking about my customer, my employee. What do you think?
Probably said no, didn't he?
He said no. And here's the thing. It's not like Chuck's new on the scene, kind of tight on the budget. No, Chuck's been a fixture in town. Chuck's been around for a long time. He is the neighborhood bike store.
Totally.
and here's the beauty, right? Chuck runs and owns the store, right? It's Chuck's Bike-O-Rama. He's family. We're family. But no, he said, no, don't want to sponsor you. Chuck has a big heart. Wanted to help Pee-wee find his lost bike when he lost his bike. Remember, he's down in the basement. And
that took forever.
That took for an Amazing Larry who apparently wanted to interrupt too.
Even Amazing Larry had something to say.
Yeah, I know, right? And Chuck said, sorry, I just can't sponsor. So I'm sad. You're sad.
Totally.
So guess what Chuck decided to do?
Well, he's not sponsors. What did he decide to do?
Well, so you would think he's not going to sponsor us. He's just going to leave us hanging out to dry. Just let us do our thing. But you know what? He did something really nice.
What did he do?
I'm going to show you.
Uh-oh. Oh, okay.
Oh, check this out.
Oh, we're borrowing the sign?
Well, at least you didn't say we stole the sign.
Different movie.
I was going to say, Chuck shows up. Uh-oh, where's my sign? Oh, don't tell Chuck. No, Chuck sent us this wonderful Chuck's Bike-O-Rama sign. And check out the lights on this thing.
That's cool. Can it change colors?
I don't know. It can blink.
Oh, wow. That is kind of cool.
That's kind of flashy, huh? So,
very eye-catching.
So even though Chuck decided not to sponsor us,
Man, this is pretty good, too.
this is pretty nice. So thanks, Chuck, for the sign. But next time, maybe consider sponsoring Cocoon Cast too.
Electricity bills cost money.
Exactly. Thanks, Chuck.
If you enjoyed our review on Pee-wee's Big Adventure, please like, which helps more viewers find our cinema community, and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming reviews, and please share with your friend.
If you've already seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure or Mystery Men and want to watch or share our review with a friend, head over to our companion channel, Cocoon Cast Clips, where we take this show and cut it up into bite-sized clips, perfect when you're short on time or just want to share a snack-sized review with your cinema community. And now it's time for our double feature movie, Mystery Men.
Champion City is home to all sorts of costumed crime fighters, but one stands above the rest, Captain Amazing. When the celebrated captain goes missing, the rest of the superhero community scrambles to unify and confront the captain's arch-nemesis, Casanova Frankenstein. The question is, with heroes like Mr. Furious, the Shoveler, and the Spleen on the roster, will the Mystery Men bring their A-game or just strike out? Teresa, I know you were particularly advocating for this movie to be part of our lineup for this program today. Would you care to explain to our cinema community why this was the case?
Honestly, I believed that it's a good juxtaposition to Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It shows Paul Reubens is able to be more than just Pee-wee. Movie came out in 1999, so close to 15 years after Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Granted, this movie is a comedy. It's a dark comedy. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I like the idea, especially, okay, where we are now are Marvel movies come out every, 3 days? DC movies, 5 times a week. I mean, there are so many superhero movies that are, sharp and glossy and just, shiny, 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 huge, huge, huge budget. This movie did not have a huge budget. And I appreciated the fact that every superhero, you were talking about the shoveler and the bowler, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So our cinema community understands that if you haven't seen it, to give you a little bit of understanding. But it's a quirky movie. The superheroes in there are not shiny or glossy or flashy. If anything, what were you saying? They're, level C or D superheroes?
It's the C team.
If even. I mean, we're talking about names that people would know. Ben Stiller is in this movie. And Ben Stiller has an anger problem. He's Mr. Furious, also known as Roy. And that's cracked me up, too, that their first names are there. And all the little superheroes, right, they refer to each other by their first names.
It feels more of a community. It's kind of a commentary on a community that one person can succeed above everyone else. But then you have this other layer of the community. It's like, when's our turn?
Well, and clearly, it's their turn. Because Captain Amazing, also known as Greg Kinnear, and I loved it, his character was the billionaire lawyer. He's not even like, the successful, he's a billionaire lawyer, which is clearly a spoof off of Bruce Wayne. So Captain Amazing, Greg Kinnear, which, our family appreciates Greg Kinnear. He's been in a lot. And it cracked me up because he comes on the scene and, he's Mr. GQ looking. and he's wearing, it looks like a race car driving suit.
Oh, with
and
all the sponsors.
And he has all the sponsors of all the people that are sponsoring him.
It actually becomes a plot point.
It does. Which, how many superheroes do you know? And that's the other thing is, it's nobody, you know, you don't want him to know he's this billionaire lawyer, right? He's incognito, but he literally comes out without a mask. He literally is just wearing the suit and his hair. And you look at him, you're like, is that my lawyer? It's just cracking me up. It's like, how stupid is this? But I think it sets the tone of how funny it is.
That's the thing I really like about Mystery Men is it's a character-led film first.
Yes.
Then comedy. It really allows you to follow the character's journey and find the humor in what they're experiencing without it being overbearing.
Well, and I think that that's a good point because each character stands on their own, like we were talking about with Pee-wee. Each character stands on their own. William H. Macy is in the movie. I mean, the cast is hilarious, right? He's the shoveler. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, him and his wife. His wife's like, oh, gosh, are you going to go out again and do this? And he's like, honey, I need to do this. And she's trying to be supportive, but he's a family guy with 2 kids. And he's like, oh, honey, I want to be a superhero. And she's like, well, what do you say when your husband says, I want to go be a superhero? Okay, honey, that's good. Go.
Well, and he doesn't have sponsors. He just has a big, giant shovel. That's
well, and
all
that's
he's got
the
going
thing.
for
In the
him.
Mystery Men, none of them have sponsors. None of them. I mean, they're just, you know, Janine Garofalo is the bowler. I mean, literally, she has a bowling ball. And if you've seen the trailers, there's a skull head in the bowling ball, which is her dad. And, you know, she's over there trying to please her dad. And I'm thinking, that's an interesting, pretty universal dynamic. Want to please your parents, want to make them proud. But
I
yet,
really thought you were going to say the bowling ball was the universal dynamic.
I don't think I'm going to analyze the bowling ball, but I would just say it's just kind of funny because she's grieving her dad. She brings her dad with her.
These aren't perfect heroes. These are all heroes that are struggling
So
with
you're
things.
telling me that people are not walking around with bowling ball?
Oh, now
with
you're
the dad?
flipping it on me.
Right. A little odd.
That's the thing I find endearing about this movie is every one of these heroes has something that they're struggling with. Even the Invisible Boy.
Oh, I liked Invisible Boy.
He's craving validation from the older superheroes for his abilities.
Well, and the fact he's Invisible Boy, which is hilarious. Like you said, it's kind of a little Robin-ish, like Batman and Robin feel. And his insecurities, right? His whole thing is, I can't go invisible if you're staring at me, which is hilarious. Like, I have superpowers, but not if you're looking at me because that's a little awkward. It's just like, so funny.
It's just, I'm sorry, I just get so lost in thought remembering moments from this movie and just, they're funny. But they're also very touching because these are characters that have emotional arcs that are trying to become more of themselves and try to figure out, do I have to sacrifice myself to become an A-list superhero?
Well, and clearly, based on their superpowers, we would say, I don't think that happened. But, you know, when Captain Amazing goes missing, as you were talking about in our synopsis, once he goes missing, they all band together and say, we need to get him back. They don't know what happened to him. They ultimately find out, you know, brief spoiler, Casanova Frankenstein, who ironically is Jeffrey Rush. Jeffrey Rush is some narcissistic, crazy villain. It's like, yeah, there's a Jeffrey Rush role you'd never expect to see.
If they ever do a Oscars Lifetime Award for him, I want them so badly, if only for the reaction shot, to put one scene of his from this movie.
Well, and I love his name. There's a part when he's incarcerated, and that kind of goes back to Captain Amazing, you know, feeling like, oh, my life's work is over now that, you know, he's been incarcerated. What do I do? He gives this great speech to the parole board. In typically Jeffrey Rush form, it's like, what a great actor, and the crazy things that he is saying, and they're like, oh, I don't know if we should let him out. I'm like, no, don't let him out. But here comes, you know, Captain Amazing. Hey, let him out. And it's like, okay, crazy superhero guy, this is not going to go well. But he doesn't see that. He just sees it'll give him an opportunity to shine once again and get his sponsors back, which I don't think we're going to do that if we, you know, continue to not have sponsors.
Well, we don't have any supervillain enemies, so.
Not that we're aware of. But I, you know, going back to the cast, Ben Stiller was in it, William H. Macy, we've talked about Jeffrey Rush, Greg Kinnear.
All of these actors, in even some of the cameo parts.
Oh, talk about the cameo. Okay, okay. Let's see. Yeah, right. Well, let me talk about Paul Reubens first, and then let's talk about a cameo, because there's the cameo, but then there's the lead person, Frank Azaria.
Hank Azaria, yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness, and he's like throwing forks, and he's looking for good forks to throw, and we're like, it's a super. Somehow he convinced me that this is a superpower.
I think it says something about the screenplay, the actors, and the directing that make you believe this. You know what I mean? You just
back to it's not true.
You want to believe this. You want to see this as a universe where these kind of heroes exist.
Well, and that's the whole thing, is unless they're, slick and flashy and everybody knows them, where are the B and C list people in our society? I mean, we can really make this quite a commentary that's pretty intelligent. Versus, oh my gosh, Hank Azaria's throwing forks, and there's a shovel guy, and Invisible Boy, which ironically you do see most of the movie. Well, and we're talking about Paul Reubens, and Paul Reubens has a supporting role. He's not the lead, but he doesn't have a lead, but he's the spleen. And do we recall what his superpower is?
I believe on TV tropes they've referred to it as fartillery.
Fartillery. Again, this movie is rated PG-13, crude humor. Really, you don't say. But there's a whole part where he plays it up.
He hams it up, but it's not at the expense of the rest of the cast. You're not like, oh, well, I guess this is the Paul Reubens farting movie now.
Except for when we're talking about it and suddenly become, But there is a comedic value to it. And the ironic thing is, whatever the superpower somebody brings, because you look at that and you go, oh, that's obnoxious. That's ridiculous. And the fact that I'm even laughing says I must have brothers, and I lived in a crazy household with my older brother.
The fact I'm laughing says I was raised by you and Dad.
Yeah, right. The fact that we're laughing, people are like, oh my goodness, you lost me there. But the part that I would take away from that is, even if it's not a superpower that you particularly identify with or think is relevant, you're like, people do faint, so it's obviously powerful. But I would say the part that I appreciate is, no matter what your superpower is, even if the outside world goes, that's ridiculous, or, if that's your talent or your ability, it says something that there's a place for him. So if you can suspend what it is.
Keep in mind, all of the superhero community in this movie auditions.
Yes.
To be in the Mystery Men. So you get to see other people that their powers are even weirder than our main cast.
Yeah, and then they're on the outside, so they're kind of like the D list. They're like, oh, maybe not for you this time, but... And there's development in the characters, of relationships outside of one another. Ben Stiller has a love interest, and he over time goes back, and I like the fact that, initially she knows him as Mr. Furious, and he's furious. And then it goes back to, he's just Roy, and he's Roy with her.
But I like that when he is himself, she opens up. It's not like, oh, he's a superhero, I really like him. It's just, he's just some average guy to her, and that gets her to open up. I think that's really sweet.
Well, and they're all just pretty average guys and gals.
Yeah.
With the bowling ball of her dad's head. Yeah. That's just
sorry, that never gets old.
I was going to say, that just kind of throws me every time. And I know we had talked about the screenplay is pretty minimal.
Definitely allows a lot of room for comedic improvisation.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much was improvised. I would agree with that. I do sort of wonder, if you're, working with all these different actors and actresses, how much. And I forgot to ask you about the cameo. What did you want to say about the cameo?
So for those of you who pay attention to all the biggest, baddest, bombastic blockbusters.
That's a way to say it. That's a way to say it.
Michael Bay actually makes a brief cameo.
Yeah, isn't he the frat boy?
Yep.
Yeah, right. That's a role that I never thought I would associate with Michael Bay.
Well, it was great because the only reason I recognized that Michael Bay was, number one, I watch way too many movies. Number two, he was also cameoed in Armageddon.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So when I saw him, I'm like, that's him. That's him. And you hadn't seen it before. And you've watched this movie how many times?
I'm not even sure, but I agree with that though. I didn't even see it. And you're like, wait, it's Michael Bay. And I'm like,
we literally are me, Dad,
Yeah.
Mom,
Yeah.
literally pulling out our phones while we're watching this going, oh, it is him.
And it was just, and we just thought he just blew up people and, arms went flying and, he, directed blue people. However.
James Cameron,
Oh, that's James Cameron. Ooh,
the other explosive director.
that's right.
The Canadian with the concussions.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry, Michael Bay. Oops. Stick to cameos as frat boys, apparently.
One of the other things that I want to spotlight in this movie is the cinematography. It's really beautiful. Stephen H. Brom really does a good job of positioning characters, letting the set have room to breathe, but also creating space for the characters to exist in the environment. And it's just nice to look at.
No, and I appreciated that because when we were watching it, you were pointing out different pieces. You're like, look over there, the space there. Look at how they've done that with the different colors. And, I appreciated that a lot because like you said, I've seen this movie multiple times, but I'll be honest, I hadn't thought of that before.
It's very clear this is homaging Joel Schumacher-style Batman movies, but it's also its own thing.
And we were talking about even the director. The director used to direct commercials, and this was his only full-length feature movie, apparently. He swore off
It's a
everything.
Sky Captain situation.
It was. He did it, and he's like, I'm not doing that. I'm going back to commercials. And he's actually an award-winning commercial director, if you will, right? Nissan, Volvo. He's done Taco Bell commercials. I don't know, sure if he's won awards for Taco Bell, but he has for the other. And the screenwriter, never seen him again either.
It's a total Mystery Men moment.
It is. It's just like people show up for this movie and then they go poof, gone. And this movie did not make money, to be clear. This is not blockbuster movie. We're encouraging our cinema community to see this. This movie made nothing. It was $68 million to make, and it made $33.5 million.
Oof.
Yeah, no money.
You know what surprised me, though? Every time I watch this, I always forget this happens. There's a certain song from Smash Mouth that actually plays.
Yes.
And this played way before Shrek, which is this movie that most people associate this with. I was surprised that they got them for the soundtrack.
Well, and that's the thing. There are so many good actors and actresses. This movie actually received pretty positive critical reviews from other, critics. Didn't do well at the box office.
I'm still trying to figure out why that is, because the 90s were all about alternative programming, especially in the comic book space. I mean, you have companies like Image Comics, Dark Horse Comics.
Well, and Dark
coming to the
Horse
table.
is part of this, right?
Dark Horse Productions.
Correct. They were part of this.
Even Top Cow. Top Cow is like, during this time period, just ballooning.
Which is hilarious. So obviously something happened there that this movie did not. I'm laughing as soon as we talk about the spleen and somebody throwing forks. I'm sure people were like, and you wonder why I didn't make money. But I would say there is a part of it where I don't know if it was the time. I guess I agree with you. During the 90s, that would have been a time that it seems like it would have. And it was before all the DC and the Marvel onslaught.
Yeah, that's true. There are some lesser known DC films. You have like Steel and things like that coming
Lesser known. What? Exactly.
But I think it's just interesting. There's definitely a cult fandom around this film.
Mm-hmm.
I was really pleasantly surprised on Twitter, I want to say earlier this year, that somebody mentioned on the official Universal Pictures Twitter that they're just like thinking about the movie, and I was pleasantly surprised to see the amount of impressions on this tweet.
It is surprising to me. However, I do find it funny, and I understand that there's some, juvenile humor and that sort of thing. But when we talk about the characters, we're talking about their life, I think it's deeper than it appears.
This one's definitely worth a revisit, I think, for a lot of people.
Sure, I would agree. Do we have any questions from the box?
This movie received generally positive reviews from the critics, but bombed in the box office. Do you really think it's worth seeing, and would you really recommend it?
I think it's worth seeing just as a piece of superhero media literature. Mm-hmm. Almost a contrast of what's to come. There was another superhero parody that came from an original idea, not necessarily an identified IP. Mystery Men is from the Flaming Carrot comics. But this movie was an original. This movie was from an original idea, and that one was just how do we not make a superhero parody?
So it's like the anti-superhero movie.
Yeah, it was a whole, the guys behind it did like all of these different parodies. I feel like this is a good example of love for the source material, but have some fun with it.
Correct. And I think it's worth seeing if you go in knowing what you're going to see. I'm wondering if that's part of why it bombed, that people saw the actors and actresses and they're like, oh, this is going to be a serious movie.
I don't know why you'd think that. All of these are well-known alternative comedians, though.
Well, but this is 1999. We know this now. Back then, I'm sure some people were like, oh, no, I'm sure it's not, you know. Mr. Greg Kinnear, Mr. GQ, Jeffrey Rush, serious actor. Oh, how crazy could it be? Hell. I'm wondering if that had an element, if people were just not expecting it. And it definitely went over the line. I mean, it was crazy, and then it was just like, you know, ooh, wow, he's going to throw that for. Do we have any questions from the box?
There are rumors of this movie being rebooted in the future. Do you think that's necessary, or do you think people should just watch this movie that seem to have missed it?
I think if you're going to do anything with this franchise, do it a re-sequel. Do it like you make it your audience think you're rebooting it, kind of make fun of some of the reboot tropes, but bring in the original cast. They've definitely got a lot to work with.
Well, you're assuming that they want to go back and revisit this. That they're like, hey, I'm so proud of this. Let's do this one more time. And, you know, some of the characters didn't make it out, so they may not have the choice to come back.
That's very true, but a lot of the heroic characters did, though.
That's true. It was cast well. The story is the story. I don't know what a reboot would do, to be honest with you.
I think the reboot could bring in more positive comedic elements. I think it could give the general public could be more interested in and be like, oh my gosh, I've never seen the original. What's this about?
That could be, meaning they wouldn't necessarily go back and see it, but a new one make me thinking this is a fresh idea, which is, I think, ironic because I think I think it had all the elements initially. And in my mind, oftentimes reboots are, like you said, new generation of people wanting to see it. And sometimes it's a chance to correct maybe what was missing in the past. To me, it's rather timeless. It felt a little 90-ish, little dated.
But it's also making fun of specific superhero tropes in the 90s as well.
That's correct. So if people aren't familiar with that, maybe they bring it forward and then they, are we nice? And then they make fun of new people. But they make light of, because I don't think it was a mean-spirited movie. I think it was dark.
It's very dark. There's some character defects that you wouldn't necessarily see in like a mainstream comic.
Rebecca, it is that time in the show where we have flying moths for this movie too. Flying moths, flying moths, flying moths. Where would your flying moth land today?
My flying moths are landing about a 3.
Oh, okay. So number one reason why it's a 3?
Number one reason why it's a 3. I felt like the casting was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like there's something missing with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe more commit to the bit spirit.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So I would say it would be a 3 for me also, but different reasons. Although I do agree with you, the acting was good. I like the layers underneath. We're talking about, you know, their first names, their story. We were able to see who they were outside of their I don't know.
Their superhero community.
Correct, but I was going to say their super identity. It was very clear, and I think that there's something powerful about that. I like the idea of there's a place for quirky people or people that aren't, you know, Spider-Man, Batman, all the big ones. I appreciated that, and their heart was good. When Captain Amazing was in trouble, they risked it all to go try to save him. I thought, wow, that's pretty good versus, we're freaked out, we're going to run away. It's like, nope, we're going to try to help him. So I think that there were some good values, if you will. Although it was painful to watch sometimes.
That's kind of, okay, that's what it is. Sometimes it was just painful to watch. I'm like, okay, this bit's going on too long. You could drag this out more.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt uneven in some ways.
Sure.
And I wish there would have been more work to kind of join the two.
Correct. And that's why I would say a 3, and I think much more than that would be a bit much. Thanks for joining us this week. We're always happy to create experiences to bring our cinema community together.
Next week, we are excited to be reviewing The Equalizer, 3, and My Big Fat Greek Wedding, 3.
Together.
It's the new Barbenheimer, baby.
And exactly what do you call this new?
My Big Fat Equalizer.
Oh my goodness. Equal wedding. Here it comes, people. Please remember to like, subscribe, and to share our channel.
If you enjoyed this show, you might check out last week where we reviewed Golda and The Woman in Gold.
Remember, cinema community movies are
Better together.
Thanks for watching. See you next week.